Hi, this is Neil Luehring, guide here at Anglers Covey, and the fly of the month this month is the pale morning dun. And I have a pattern that I've been tying the last couple of years. It's been really successful for myself and some of the other guides around the shop here, so they asked me if I would tie it for this video. So it's very similar. Last October I did a video for the blue-winged olives. It's basically the same platform. When I say platform, I'm talking about the fact of the basic design of the fly. So what we're changing is the components a little bit, changing colors, those kind of things to imitate a different mayfly. But basically, if you use this, wing with the Antron wing and the hackle and the tail and everything like it's set up, you can pretty much tie any mayfly you want with that platform. It's just a matter of finding the right components. This fly happened to be an interesting pattern in that exercise because the color of this fly is really critical, and it needs to be right for these flies to work. So what I finally discovered was using Antron yarn for the body, and then when you put your fly floating on and stuff, you don't get a color change with it. So just some of those things you have to think through. Like my blue-winged olive, I tie it in a fairly bright green. When you put the floatant on it, it turns the color of the real fly. This one would do the opposite. I think I'd have it right, put the floatant on it, and it would go light or dark or whatever. I could just never get the color right. So the Antron yarn was kind of the key to the completion of this particular pattern. The other thing is, even though the real flies don't have a tan wing like this, when I put this light tan widow's web on there for the wing, the pattern started working. So sometimes we can't explain why that stuff happens. It just does. And in this case, it's been a very successful pattern for me. I was on the river today guiding, and the pale morning duns were starting to hatch. Saw quite a few of them. Didn't really see the fish on them yet, but it's just a matter of time now that they're starting to come out. So, anyway, this great little fly. It's very durable. I think the engineering in a fly to last for a while is really important, and I do that in all the flies that I tie. So let's tie the pattern. Let's start tying this pattern. So first thing I'm going to do, we're using a standard dry fly hook, TMCO 100. It's pretty much the one I'm using. The thread I'm using is a Unithread. It's an 8/0 light Cahill color. So as I said in the intro, this is very similar to the platform that I tie that BWO that we did previously on the fly of the month thing. It's basically a platform that you can pretty much tie any mayfly that you want to just by changing some of the components around a little bit, but it still gives you the same profile and still gives you the same results really. It seems to be working really well, for at least for me. So this is a ginger neck, we call it. You can see it's kind of the color of ginger spice. That's why we call it a ginger neck. The color is, if you look at the spice, it's almost identical to the same color. So I'm going to take one of the spade feathers off of the side of this. And I call it a spade because when you splay the hackle fibers out, can you see how it's kind of spade shaped? Like that? All right. And what that does, it gives us nice long fibers for the tail, and they're also very stiff fibers, so they're ideal for the tailing stock on these flies. So I'm going to strip a few of those off. So I have a little bunch of those here, and I'm going to set a tail that's approximately the shank length, like we do with most dry flies, on there. I'm going to come under here, trim that out of there. All right, wrap forward over that. All right, somewhere around 3/4 of the way up the hook is usually pretty good. So what I'm using for the wing on this fly is I'm using Widow's Web. This is a light tan color, and I've tried some others. This is the same material. This is a polar bear color, they call it. It's got a little bit of a yellow tint to it as well. I didn't like it as well. When I hit this light tan on it, it really, to me, set this pattern off. So I'm going to cut a little clump of this off of here. If you think of maybe start with like a wooden matchstick kind of amount. That's probably a little bit too much, but cut it back a little bit. That's usually what you need for the wing, somewhere in there. I may not get it right the first time, we'll see. Anyway, we're going to set this for the wing. You can kind of see how much I have there. Maybe like the thick part of a toothpick. I don't know how many fibers, I never bothered to count them. But alright, so I'm going to set that with the soft loop. And again, sometimes when you're tying flies, the key piece of it is just a particular cut that you might make. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold that up a little bit. I'm going to come in here and lay my scissor like this. And I'm going to cut it flat like that. What that does is it cuts that wing at an angle so that I get a nice tapered underbody on there. I don't get big stair steps out of that. This wing is a little too long, so I'm just going to cut it out of the way. Normally I do that and then I'll use both pieces, obviously. Alright, so when I was working on this fly pattern for the PMD, the Pale Morning Dun, the hardest part of it was coming up with the color for the body. And I tried multiple different dubbings. The problem is when you put your floatant on them, they always change color. So because of that, I started thinking about kind of outside the box a little bit. And what I finally settled on is Antron yarn. It's a cream color. The only big problem with this is it's a fairly heavy strand of yarn. Obviously, if I tied this little fly with that big strand, it's going to have a pretty fat body on it. So what you have to do is take about 5 or 6 inches of it, and you want to take this and you want to split some of the fibers off of it. And it always wants to tangle up, and you just kind of have to pull and keep at it. So if you do that, you end up with a smaller strand like this. All right, twist those together. Now here's a little trick that I learned many years ago in fly tying, is that when you go to tie in a body of a fly, I watched a lot of people, they'll tie in floss bodies or yarn bodies or whatever, and they'll hold this end in here and they'll tie it in like that. The way to load this is to simply take it under your bobbin, match up the ends. You can slide this down, all right, and do that. So what that does, first of all, there's no way that it can pull out on you. It's tied in. It's going to wrap twice as fast, so to speak, and you're not going to get a lot of bulk at the back of the fly. So you can see, watch as I tie this, how thin my body stays using that way of loading that floss, or in this case this Antron yarn, on there. So anytime I tie floss or anything like that, that's how I load my floss onto the hook. Try it, I think you'll like it. Alright, so we got to stand this wing up. Right, need to post it. I usually put about 3 wraps here. Now quite honestly, at this point right now, if I tied the hackle on and tied a parachute hackle, I'd have a parachute, right? Because it's a posted wing like a parachute. I'd probably put a few more wraps around the base, but we're going to tie it with a traditional hackle that's tied to the hook, so it's secured really well, and it's going to give us a good hackle, a good durable fly. These I'm using a whiting saddle neck here. I'm going to show you how long these things are. So each one of those hackles will probably tie at least a half a dozen of these flies. So I just need to size one to the hook here. Don't be afraid to oversize this hackle a little bit. Sometimes in this case this is almost too good. And I'll be honest with the whiting gingers can be pretty tough to find. But you can use a variant. There's other things you could use. You could probably just use a lighter colored grizzly and be fine on it if you wanted to as well. Alright, so I'm stripping the base off of here. I'm going to use my old European hackling technique. I'm going to tie this on at the front. I'm going to tip that wing back, and then I'm going to come behind the wing and put a wrap there. So this hackle's about 2 feet too long, feels like. Anyway, so we're going to clip it fairly short with a hackle plier. I'm going to hold the wing back a little out of my way, and I'm going to put 4 wraps of good hackle in front of it. I'm going to put 2 wraps of hackle behind it. Now I switched hands, took the hackle plier in my left hand, I'm going to take the bobbin in my right hand, and I'm going to wrap through. And then I'm just going to work this, spiral it out through the hackle like that, sweep it back, build a little bit of a head there, dress it up a little bit. We're ready for the whip finish. I usually go ahead and just tie it off at this point so that you don't have something slip off there. And there's nothing more frustrating being done with a fly and have something slip. So I got one little barb I'm going to trim out of there. All right, hackle trim, or the wing trims at a big angle like this. And I'll usually kind of give him a little bit of a haircut there. Make sure everything lines up good. That's actually probably a touch tall. So when you look at the wings on mayflies, they're pretty tall. All right, and I'm going to use my little push technique here. I'm going to open my scissor base a little and push to cut that hackle out of there. And that's my little pale morning dun pattern. One last thing I forgot to mention was that I always trim this hackle off even with the bend, the lower part of the bend of the hook. So I'll take it like this. I'll come along that bend. Is that good? I'll come along that bend and just give it a snip there to flatten it down so it sits lower in the water. So the finished fly is actually going to look like that. So that's the bug of the month for this month. Pale morning duns come in a lot of colors, a lot of sizes and a lot of colors. This is kind of the standard color we see on a lot of our rivers around here. And if you have any comments or anything you'd like to leave on our site here, we certainly welcome that. And next month we're going to do Yellow Sally is going to be the bug of the month. So happy fishing. If you tie a few of these up, I hope they work for you.